I'm going to tell this exactly how it happened. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just explaining the night the normal part of my life quietly ended. At the time, I was 29 years old. I worked a regular warehouse job outside Des Moines, Iowa. Nothing special. I wasn't reckless or into risky situations. I lived alone, paid my bills, and kept to myself. Most nights were the same. Dinner, TV, sleep. That night started no differently.
It was a Tuesday.
I remember that clearly because trash pickup was the next morning. I got home around 7 p.m. The sky was already dark, but that was normal for winter. My farmhouse sat on the edge of a gravel road, surrounded by cornfields that had been harvested weeks earlier. The place had belonged to my grandfather, and I was staying there temporarily while saving money. It was quiet. Too quiet sometimes, but I liked that. I parked my truck, grabbed my bag, and went inside. The house smelled like old wood and dust, the same way it always had. I locked the front door out of habit.
Checked my phone.
No missed calls. No messages. Just another night. I made food and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone while I ate. The wind was light, tapping against the windows now and then. The house made its usual noises, pipes ticking, floorboards shifting. Nothing unusual. Around 9 p.m., I stood up to take the trash out early. I remember being annoyed because it was cold and I didn't feel like putting my boots back on. When I opened the back door, I noticed the motion light near the barn was already on. That stopped me for a second. The light only turned on when something moved near it. Animals triggered it sometimes, so I didn't panic. I just stood there, looking out into the dark field. The light flickered once, then stayed steady. I took a step outside and listened. No wind. No animals. No sound at all. I told myself it was nothing and took the trash to the bin. When I came back, the light was off. Again. I didn't think much of it. I locked the door and went back inside. Later that night, while brushing my teeth, I noticed something else. The hallway window, which I always kept latched, was slightly open. Just an inch or two. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I'd opened it earlier. I couldn't remember doing that. I closed it, latched it, and went to bed. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. Everything felt normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had already changed before I noticed anything was wrong. The farmhouse wasn't new, but it wasn't falling apart either. It sat about 200 yards off the gravel road, with a long dirt driveway cutting through empty cornfields. In the daytime, it felt peaceful. At night, it just felt isolated. There were no nearby houses close enough to see their lights. If you stood outside after dark, the only thing you could hear was wind moving through the fields or a truck passing far away. The house itself had 2 floors and a basement. Downstairs was the kitchen, living room, and a small bathroom. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms and a narrow hallway. The walls were thin, and every step made noise. My grandfather built the place in the 1950s, and most of it hadn't changed much since then. Old wooden doors. Simple locks. Windows that stuck when you tried to open them. I was living there alone at the time, because rent in town had gotten too expensive. My uncle owned the property and didn't use it anymore, so he let me stay there as long as I checked on the warning system and kept the place from being vandalized. A few farmhouses nearby had been broken into earlier that year. Mostly theft. Tools, fuel, copper wire. Nothing violent from what I'd heard. That's why I was there. Not because I wanted solitude. Just because it made sense financially. My routine was simple. I woke up early, drove into town for work, came home before dark, ate dinner and went to bed. I didn't invite people over. There was no internet, just weak cell service and a small TV. Most nights I read or watched old DVDs. That evening felt no different from any other. The air was cold, dry, and still.
No storm.
No heavy wind. The sky was clear enough to see stars if you stepped outside. Inside, the house felt calm. Warm lights.
Familiar smells.
Everything where it should be. I double-checked the locks before bed, like I always did. Front door. Back door.
Basement door.
All secure. I didn't own a gun, but I kept my phone charged and the truck keys on the nightstand. The only other person involved was my uncle, and he was out of state that week. He had called earlier that day just to check in. He told me again not to worry too much, that people like to scare each other with stories out there. I believed him. At that point, there was no fear, no sense of danger. Just another quiet night in a place I thought I understood. That's what made what happened later so hard to process. The first thing that felt off wasn't a sound. It was the quiet. I had been lying in bed for a while, half awake, half asleep. The house usually made noise at night. Pipes would click. Wood would shift. You learned to ignore it. That night, everything stopped. It felt like the house was holding its breath. I checked my phone. Just after 12:30 a.m. I rolled onto my side and tried to sleep. A few minutes later, I heard a soft thud. Not loud enough to scare me, just enough to notice. It came from downstairs, near the kitchen. I told myself something probably fell off the counter. Old houses did that. Then I heard it again. This time it sounded like a footstep. Slow, careful, like someone testing the floor. I sat up in bed and listened. My heart wasn't racing yet. I wasn't panicking. I was just focused. The sound didn't repeat right away. There was a long pause, then a faint scrape, like a shoe dragging slightly across wood. I stood up and opened my bedroom door just enough to look into the hallway. It was dark, but I could see the outline of the stairs. Everything looked normal. No lights on. No movement. I stayed there for a full minute listening. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint, but it didn't belong. A mix of dirt and something metallic. It reminded me of a cold garage. I hadn't smelled it earlier that night. I assumed it was coming from the basement and told myself I was imagining it. I closed the door and sat back on the bed. A few minutes later, I heard breathing. It wasn't close enough to feel, just enough to hear. Slow and controlled. Not like someone sleeping, like someone standing still. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The sound seemed to move slightly, like the person was turning their head. My skin went cold. I reached for my phone and turned the screen on. The light felt too bright. I muted it immediately and listened again. The breathing stopped. That scared me more than if it had continued. Then the floorboard at the bottom of the stairs creaked. I knew that sound. I'd stepped on that exact board every day. It only made noise if someone put weight on it. I stayed still, barely breathing, counting the seconds. After that, there was silence again. Heavy silence. The kind that makes you feel watched even when you can't see anything. I realized I wasn't alone in the house. I hadn't seen anything yet. I hadn't heard anything clearly enough to prove it. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I stayed on the bed, holding my phone, listening. I didn't move. I didn't even sit back against the wall. I felt like any sound I made would give me away. My bedroom door was closed, but it didn't have a lock. That thought kept repeating in my head. After a few minutes, I heard movement again. This time it was closer. Not downstairs. A soft step came from the hallway outside my room. The floorboard near the stairs creaked. Again, then another one farther down the hall. Whoever it was knew the house well enough to move slowly. They weren't rushing. They weren't panicking. I slid off the bed and stood behind the door, pressing my hand against the handle to keep it from moving. My breathing felt too loud in my ears. I focused on keeping it slow. A shadow passed under the crack of the door. It blocked the light from a hallway window for just a second. Long enough for me to know someone was standing there. I didn't see a face. I didn't see details. Just the shape of a person. The handle on my door turned slightly. Not enough to open it. Just enough to test it. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. The handle stopped moving, but the person didn't leave. I could feel it. They were still there, standing inches away. Then I heard a quiet sniff, like someone breathing through their nose. I realized then that this wasn't someone who wandered in by mistake. They were checking rooms, one by one, looking for me. The handle moved again, harder this time. I pushed back with my weight. The door rattled slightly, but stayed shut. After a few seconds, the pressure stopped. Footsteps moved away, slow and controlled, toward the other bedroom. I didn't relax. I didn't feel relief. I felt trapped. I looked around my room for something to use as a weapon. All I had was a small flashlight and my phone.
No look.
No escape except the window, which looked out over the driveway. As I was thinking about it, I heard the other bedroom door open. Drawers slid out. Something metal clinked softly, like tools touching. My stomach dropped. They were taking their time. A minute later, the footsteps came back down the hallway. This time they stopped right outside my door again. The handle didn't move right away. Instead, I heard something new. A quiet whisper. I couldn't make out words. Just breath and sound. Like someone talking to themselves. That was when I understood I wasn't just in danger. I was being hunted inside my own house. The whisper stopped, and the door handle moved again. This time it didn't test. It turned fully. I felt the latch give slightly under my hand. I pushed back harder, leaning my full weight against the door. The door shook once. Not from force. From control. That scared me more than if they had kicked it. I backed away suddenly and moved toward the window. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. I didn't think anymore. I just acted. I raised the window as slowly as I could, trying not to make noise, but the old frame scraped loudly. The door handle twisted again. Harder. I climbed halfway out the window when the door burst open.
I didn't look back.
I felt the cold air hit my face as I dropped to the ground. The fall knocked the breath out of me, but I forced myself up and ran. I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy now. Fast. I ran barefoot across the dirt driveway, stones cutting into my feet. I could hear breathing behind me, close enough that I knew if I slowed down, I was done. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I just ran. I made it to my truck and yanked the door open. My hands slipped on the handle. I dropped the keys once, picked them up, and shoved them into the ignition. The engine didn't start the first time. I heard a hand hit the side of the truck.
Hard.
I turned the key again. The engine roared to life. I slammed the door shut and hit the gas without looking back. The truck fishtailed on the gravel before catching traction. I didn't stop until I hit the main road. I pulled over a mile away and called 911. My voice sounded calm when I spoke, but my body was shaking so badly I couldn't sit still. I told them someone had been inside my house and tried to get into my bedroom. I waited with my doors locked until police arrived. They followed me back to the farmhouse. The house was dark. Too dark. The front door was wide open. Police went in first. I stayed outside, watching the windows. I kept expecting to see movement. A face.
Anything.
They didn't find him right away, but they found proof that he had been there, and that he hadn't just arrived that night. The police searched the house room by room. It took longer than I expected. They moved slowly, checking corners, closets, and behind doors. I stood outside with another officer, watching the upstairs windows. Nothing moved. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers called me inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Stronger than before. Dirt, sweat, and something sharp like metal. They led me to the basement door. It was open. I knew for a fact I had locked it before going to bed. The basement lights were on. Down there, behind a water heater, they found a small space I didn't know existed. A narrow crawl area hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. Inside it were blankets, empty food cans, water bottles, and cigarette butts. Some of them were fresh. One officer looked at me and asked how long I had been living there. When I told him, his expression changed. They kept searching. In the second bedroom upstairs, they found drawers open neatly, not tossed around, organized. Inside one drawer, they found a knife. Not from the kitchen. A large hunting knife with a worn handle. Under the bed, they found a backpack. Inside it were gloves, a flashlight, duct tape, and a small notebook. The notebook is what changed everything. One of the officers flipped through it carefully, then told me to sit down. The pages were filled with dates and short notes.
Times.
Movements. Lights on. Lights off. When I left for work. When I came home. My routine. There were notes about me sleeping. About which rooms I used. Which lights I turned off last. One line stood out. It had today's date written next to it. Upstairs. Left room. That was my bedroom. The officer told me the man hadn't just broken in that night. He'd been living in the off for weeks, possibly longer, using the basement crawl space during the day, moving around at night, watching. They believed he turned the porch and motion lights on and off to test whether anyone noticed. The open window wasn't an accident. Neither were the sounds. He hadn't rushed me because he didn't need to. Then they told me the part that made my stomach drop. The man wasn't caught that night. The front door had been left open, but there were no signs of forced entry when police arrived. No footprints outside. No trail. He knew exactly when to leave and how to disappear into the fields. One officer said something quietly, like he didn't want me to hear it. He probably left when you jumped out the window. That meant he was still inside when I was running through the house. Close enough to watch me escape. Close enough to touch my truck. They packed up after a while and told me not to stay there anymore. They said they'd patrol the area, but they didn't sound confident. As I grabbed a few things from inside, I realized something else. The notebook ended the day before. There were no notes about me leaving the house that night, which meant he was planning to stay. I didn't go back to the farmhouse after that night. I stayed with a coworker for a few weeks, then moved into a small apartment in town. I told people I just didn't like living that far out anymore. I didn't explain the real reason. Saying it out loud made it feel too real. The police followed up once. They said they never found the man.
No fingerprints.
No name. No matching reports. The notebook disappeared into evidence, and that was the last I heard about it. The case stayed open, but nothing came from it. Life went back to normal on the surface. I went to work. I slept indoors, with locks that felt stronger.
But something about me changed.
I started noticing small things. Lights that were off when I thought I left them on. Doors that felt different when I touched the handle. The sound of footsteps in places that should have been empty. I told myself it was just nerves. A month later, my uncle called me. He said someone had been near the farmhouse again. A neighbor reported seeing a light on inside late at night. The power had been shut off, so it shouldn't have been possible. The police checked the place and found nothing. No damage. No signs of anyone staying there. But the basement door was unlocked. My uncle decided to sell the property after that. He never stayed there again. Before it was listed, he went back one last time to collect a few old things. He asked me to come with him. I refused. A week later, he called me, shaken. While cleaning out the upstairs bedroom, he found something tucked behind the baseboard. It was folded and dusty, like it had been hidden for a long time. It was a single page of paper. No date.
No anduriting irakugnisa.
Just one sentence written in block letters. You left the light on. The farmhouse is empty now. No one lives there. No one is supposed to be inside. But sometimes when I drive past that road at night, I still look toward the fields. And I wonder if he's watching another house now, writing down someone else's routine, waiting for the right night to stop hiding. I tried to move on after that, but moving on didn't mean forgetting. It just meant learning how to live with a constant sense of caution. I started double-checking locks without realizing it. I slept with lights on for months. Any unfamiliar noise made my body tense before my mind could catch up. The police never called again. When I reached out once to ask if there were any updates, the officer I spoke to sounded tired. He told me cases like that were hard.
No witnesses.
No clear identity. No proof of where the man went after he left the house. He said it was possible the man was transient, moving from place to place, staying where no one noticed. That answer stayed with me. A few weeks later, I realized something else that bothered me more than anything else. The man had known my routine better than I did. He knew when I slept deeply. He knew when I was awake. He knew which room I felt safest in. That meant he'd been close enough for long enough to learn those things without being seen. Sometimes I wondered how many nights he stood outside my bedroom door before that one. How many times I had fallen asleep while he was somewhere in the house, listening. I stopped answering unknown phone numbers. I stopped opening doors unless I expected someone. I avoided isolated places, even during the day. Friends told me I was being paranoid. I didn't argue. They hadn't lived through it. About 6 months later, I had a moment that made my stomach drop all over again. I was home late from work, pulling into the parking lot of my apartment complex. As I parked, I noticed a car sitting at the far end of the lot. Engine off. No one inside that I could see. I didn't think much of it until I walked past it and noticed the interior light flick on briefly. I froze. It shut off again almost immediately. I stood there for a long time, watching the car, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I went inside, locked my door, and sat on the couch in silence. I told myself it was coincidence. Someone else coming home. Nothing more. But that night, I didn't sleep. After that, there were more moments like that. Small ones. Easy to explain away if you wanted to. A door in my apartment hallway left slightly ajar when I knew I'd closed it. Footsteps outside my door that stopped when I stood up. The feeling of being watched in places where no one should have been paying attention to me. I never saw him again. At least, not clearly. But I also never got confirmation that he was caught. Or that he left the area. Or that he stopped doing what he was doing. What scares me most now isn't what happened that night. It's what didn't happen. He didn't
rush. He didn't panic.
He didn't make mistakes. He waited until I left and vanished without a trace. Sometimes I think the farmhouse was just one stop. One place where he practiced being patient. Where he learned how long people take to notice when something is wrong. And every time I turn off a light before bed, I still wonder if someone else is somewhere nearby, quietly noticing it too. The fear didn't fade with time. It settled in quietly and stayed. I learned how to function with it, but it never really left. Even now, years later, I still catch myself listening for sounds that don't belong. A floorboard creaking. A door closing too softly. Breathing that feels out of place. There's one detail I rarely tell people because it sounds small, but it's the part that bothers me the most. After I moved out of the farmhouse, I went back once during the day to collect the rest of my things. Police had already cleared the house, and my uncle insisted it was safe. Sunlight filled the rooms, and everything looked normal. Almost harmless. While packing, I noticed something scratched into the inside of my bedroom door, near the handle. It was faint, like it had been done with a nail or a knife tip. I had never seen it before. It was a single line, about the height of my eyes, like someone had marked where their face would be. I didn't tell the police. I didn't tell my uncle. I closed the door and left. To this day, I still think about that mark. How long it had been there. How many nights he stood in that exact spot, close enough to touch the handle, close enough to hear me breathing on the other side.
The farmhouse is gone now.
Torn down and replaced with open land. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still feel that same presence. Like someone is standing just outside the door, waiting for me to notice.